My wife's sister convinced her to pretend she wanted a divorce as a wake-up call to make me a better husband. Their scheme completely backfired when I hired a lawyer and filed the papers myself. I'm 34 years old and have been married to my wife Rachel for 5 years. We've been living in our house for the past 2 years and I genuinely believed we had built something lasting together. We managed our finances jointly, shared household duties, and had developed this steady rhythm that worked for both of us. Sure, we weren't newlyweds anymore sending each other romantic texts every hour, but I considered us a stable, mature married couple working toward our long-term goals together. What I didn't know is that Rachel had been complaining to her older sister Linda about feeling like our marriage had become too routine. Linda, who's been through 2 divorces herself, apparently convinced Rachel that I was taking her for granted and that she needed to create some drama to wake me up and make me a more attentive husband. About 10 weeks ago, Rachel started acting completely unlike herself. She began making remarks about how she felt unfulfilled in our marriage and questioning whether we'd gotten married too young. At first, I thought she might be going through some kind of midlife crisis, so I tried to be supportive and give her room to express whatever she was feeling. But then she started talking about how she regretted not staying single longer and wasn't sure if she was cut out for married life. She said she'd been reflecting on her choices and wondering if settling down at 29 had been a mistake. She mentioned feeling like she'd lost her identity and independence, and that our marriage felt more like a business arrangement than a romantic partnership. I was completely blindsided but tried to stay calm. I told her I wanted to understand what she was going through and that we could work together to address whatever was making her unhappy. I suggested we could try new activities together, plan some romantic getaways, or even see a marriage counselor if she felt we needed professional help. During this conversation, she was emotional and kept saying how much she loved me but that she'd been feeling trapped in our domestic routine and needed to rediscover who she was as an individual. She talked about possibly separating for a while and suggested we consider a trial separation to give her time to figure out what she really wanted from life and marriage. She even provided specific examples of how she felt our relationship had become stagnant and predictable. Rachel said she missed the excitement of dating and the thrill of not knowing what each day would bring. She mentioned that Linda had been pointing out how different she seemed now compared to when she was single, and how marriage had supposedly dulled her personality and ambitions. I spent the next 2 months in absolute emotional turmoil. I started researching divorce lawyers since she seemed serious about separation and I wanted to understand my options. I had to explain to my parents that Rachel and I were having serious problems, which was mortifying because they'd been asking when we might start thinking about having children. My father was particularly concerned and kept offering to talk to Rachel himself because he could see how destroyed I was. My mother suggested we stay with them for a while if we needed space from each other, and my brother awkwardly tried to give me advice about how sometimes marriages go through rough patches. The whole experience was humiliating because I'd been so proud of our marriage that I'd often bragged to friends about how well we worked together. The worst part was how Rachel seemed to be thriving during this supposed marital crisis. She was spending more time with Linda and her divorced friends, posting photos of herself at wine bars and spa days I'd never heard of, and generally appearing to enjoy this new version of herself. Meanwhile, I was losing sleep and couldn't concentrate at work because I kept wondering if the woman I'd vowed to spend my life with was about to ask for a divorce. I started having panic attacks about our future and had to start seeing a therapist to deal with the anxiety. My colleagues noticed that I seemed stressed and distracted all the time. My manager even suggested I'd take some personal time because my work quality had clearly suffered. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, unable to think about anything except the possibility that my marriage was falling apart. Rachel would have deep conversations with me occasionally during this period, sending mixed messages about loving me but also talking about how liberating it felt to consider other life paths. She'd say things like, "I'm starting to remember who I used to be before we got married and maybe this crisis will help us both grow as individuals." These conversations would give me hope for a few days, but then she'd go out with Linda again and come back talking about independence and self-discovery. I found myself constantly analyzing her behavior and mood for signs of what she was really thinking. When she seemed happy after spending time with her sister, I'd wonder if Linda was encouraging her to leave me. When she was affectionate toward me, I'd hope it meant she was reconsidering the separation. The emotional roller coaster was exhausting and affecting every aspect of my life. After about 2 months of this agony, I'd started accepting that our marriage might actually be over. I'd even consulted with a divorce attorney, not because I wanted to end things, but because I needed to understand what separation would look like financially and legally. Then Linda's ex-husband Mark called me completely drunk one evening, rambling about how impressed he was with Linda for finally teaching Rachel how to handle a husband and how their strategy was working perfectly because I was finally acting like a man who might lose something important. I had no idea what he was talking about, so I pressed him for details. That's when Mark revealed that the entire marriage crisis was completely fake. Linda had convinced Rachel that the best way to get me to be a more romantic and attentive husband was to make me think our marriage was in jeopardy. They'd planned out what Rachel should say to make it seem like she was having genuine doubts about our future together. According to Mark, Linda had been orchestrating this marriage intervention for months after Rachel mentioned feeling like our relationship had become too comfortable. Linda convinced Rachel that comfortable marriages often lead to husbands becoming lazy and unappreciative, so they needed to create urgency to motivate me toward being a better partner. Mark drunkenly confessed that Linda had been monitoring my behavior through Rachel and celebrating every sign that I was becoming more desperate to save our marriage. They thought it was hilarious that I'd started bringing Rachel flowers randomly and planning surprise date nights to try to prove my commitment. I hung up on Mark and sat in my garage for hours, trying to process what I'd just learned. When Rachel came home that night, I confronted her with what Mark had told me. She immediately started crying and admitted everything. She said it had started as a simple plan to motivate me toward being more romantic, but it had escalated into something much more serious than she'd intended. Rachel explained that Linda had convinced her that our marriage was getting stale and that I was taking her for granted. Linda told her that comfortable marriages often lead to husbands becoming complacent because they're getting all the benefits of marriage without having to work for them. The fake crisis was supposed to create urgency and make me realize I needed to step up as a husband before I lost her. She apologized endlessly and said she never meant for it to go on so long or cause me so much pain. She claimed she'd been planning to end the charade soon and that she was actually ready to work on our marriage because the fake crisis had made her realize how much she loved being married to me. But I was absolutely furious. I told her that instead of motivating me to be a better husband, she'd actually accomplished the opposite. I couldn't believe that someone who'd promised to love and honor me would put me through months of emotional torture just to test how much effort I'd put into our marriage. If she wanted more romance, she could have simply talked to me about it instead of creating an elaborate deception. The more I thought about it, the more betrayed I felt. I realized that every conversation we'd had during those months had been based on lies. When she'd cried about feeling trapped, she was acting. When she'd talked about needing independence, she was following Linda's script. When she'd said she regretted getting married young, she was deliberately trying to hurt me to get the reaction Linda wanted. I thought about all the sleepless nights I'd spent wondering what I'd done wrong in our marriage, all the self-doubt I'd experienced about whether I was good enough for her, all the anxiety I'd felt about our future together. She'd watched me go through all of that emotional turmoil while knowing it was completely manufactured for her entertainment and Linda's approval. Rachel kept insisting that Linda had convinced her it was the only way to get through to me and that she'd been wrong to listen to her sister. She begged me to understand that everything she'd done was because she loved me and wanted us to have a stronger marriage. She said the plan had backfired because she'd realized during our fake crisis that she didn't actually want independence at all. She even tried to turn the situation around on me, saying that if I really loved her, I'd be able to forgive one mistake and that my willingness to throw away 5 years of marriage over this proved that maybe I wasn't as committed to our vows as I claimed to be. This manipulation attempt only made me angrier because it showed she still didn't understand the fundamental problem with what she'd done. I told her that the trust between us was completely destroyed and that I couldn't imagine staying married to someone who thought emotional manipulation was an appropriate way to improve our relationship. She'd spent months watching me suffer and worry about our future while knowing the entire crisis was manufactured. That level of deception wasn't something I could just forgive and move forward from. Rachel promised she'd never listen to Linda again and suggested we try marriage counseling to work through the trust issues. But I'd already made up my mind. I told her that I was done with the marriage and that she'd gotten her wish for independence, just not in the way she'd planned. Over the next few days, Linda and her divorced friends started calling me to defend their actions and convince me to forgive Rachel. Linda insisted that they'd only been trying to help Rachel get what she wanted and that their plan had actually worked because I'd shown how much I valued our marriage. Her friend Michelle told me I was being unreasonable and that Rachel had learned her lesson about listening to bad advice. But their phone calls only made things worse because they revealed more details about how calculated the entire scheme had been. Linda mentioned that they'd been planning this intervention for months and had researched different strategies online before settling on the fake marriage crisis approach. Michelle admitted that they'd been tracking my responses and adjusting Rachel's behavior based on how I reacted to different triggers. The most disturbing revelation came from Linda herself, who called to apologize but ended up making things worse by explaining how much thought they'd put into psychological manipulation. She said they'd studied articles about marriage dynamics and male psychology to make their plan more effective. They'd specifically chosen the timing of Rachel's supposed crisis to coincide with the stress of a big project at work because they thought it would make me more desperate to resolve things quickly. But the more I reflected on it, the angrier I became. These women had treated my emotions like a game and had encouraged Rachel to deceive me for months. They'd turned our marriage into an experiment and had been entertained by my distress when I thought I was losing the person I'd committed my life to. I also started realizing that this probably wasn't the first time Rachel had been manipulative in our marriage. Looking back, I could identify other instances where she'd used emotional manipulation to get what she wanted, but I'd always rationalized them as normal marriage dynamics. The fake crisis was just the most extreme example of a pattern I'd been too blind to see. I moved out of our house within 10 days. Rachel continued calling and texting, begging for another chance and promising that she'd do anything to rebuild my trust. She said she understood why I was angry but that ending a 5-year marriage over one mistake seemed extreme. The moving process was emotionally devastating because every item I packed reminded me of our shared life and the future I'd thought we were building together. I had to divide up furniture we'd bought together, wedding gifts we'd received, and household items we'd accumulated over the years. Rachel tried to use this as another opportunity to convince me to stay, pointing out how much we'd invested in our life together and how difficult divorce would be. She also tried a different approach, suggesting that we could use this experience to make our marriage stronger. She said that now that we'd been through a major crisis, we'd be better equipped to handle future challenges and that our trust could be rebuilt stronger than before. She even suggested that the fake crisis had revealed how much we really meant to each other, since I'd fought so hard to save our marriage. But every conversation with Rachel just reinforced my decision to leave. She kept trying to minimize what she'd done by calling it a mistake or a lapse in judgment, but I saw it as a fundamental betrayal that revealed her true character. The fact that she'd been able to maintain the deception for months while watching me suffer showed a level of emotional detachment that I found deeply disturbing. The problem is that I don't see it as one mistake. I see it as a fundamental character flaw that allowed her to deceive someone she'd vowed to love and honor for the sake of manipulating them into being more romantic. The fact that she thought this was an acceptable way to handle marriage concerns tells me everything I need to know about her judgment and values. I also couldn't stop thinking about what other deceptions she might be capable of in the future. If she could orchestrate such an elaborate scheme over something as basic as wanting more romance, what would she do if we faced other marital challenges? Would she manipulate our children if we had kids together? Would she lie to me about financial decisions or career choices if she thought it would get her what she wanted? My family and friends are divided on whether I made the right choice. Some think I should have given Rachel another chance since her intentions weren't malicious and she was genuinely trying to strengthen our marriage. Others agree that what she did was unforgivable manipulation that would have destroyed our trust permanently. My brother thinks I'm being too harsh and that all marriages involve some level of game playing and manipulation. He pointed out that Rachel hadn't actually cheated or done anything that caused permanent damage, and he suggested that I was throwing away a good marriage over hurt pride. My sister, on the other hand, was horrified by what Rachel had done and said she couldn't imagine putting someone she loved through that kind of emotional torture. My parents were similarly split. My mom thought I should give Rachel another chance because she believed people could learn from their mistakes and grow. She worried that I was being too rigid in my expectations and that I might regret losing someone I'd loved for 5 years. My dad, however, supported my decision and said that trust was the foundation of any successful marriage and that Rachel had proven she couldn't be trusted. The reactions from our mutual friends were also mixed. Some thought I was overreacting and that the fake crisis was just a misguided attempt to improve our marriage. They pointed out that Rachel's plan had actually revealed how much I valued our relationship and suggested that we could build on that foundation. Others were shocked by the level of deception involved and agreed that what Rachel had done was manipulative and cruel. But I keep coming back to the same conclusion. If Rachel was capable of orchestrating such an elaborate deception over something as basic as wanting more romance, how could I ever trust her again? Marriage is supposed to be built on honest communication, not psychological games designed to manipulate your spouse into being more attentive. The most frustrating part was how many people seemed to think that because Rachel's intentions were good, the means she used were acceptable. They acted like emotional manipulation was just another marriage strategy, rather than a serious violation of trust and respect. I'm now living in my own apartment and slowly rebuilding my life as a divorced man. It's been difficult because I genuinely loved Rachel and had envisioned growing old with her, but I can't stay married to someone who thinks manipulation is an acceptable relationship tool. The hardest part is knowing that if Rachel had simply talked to me about wanting more romance, I probably would have been more than happy to step up my efforts as a husband. Instead, her decision to create fake marriage drama ended up destroying the very relationship she was trying to strengthen. So that's my story. I ended a 5-year marriage because my wife's sister convinced her to fake wanting a divorce to test how much I valued our relationship. Everyone keeps telling me I overreacted, but I believe I dodged a bullet by discovering Rachel's true character before we had children together. Update: it's been 7 months since I filed for divorce from Rachel, and I wanted to provide an update because the situation has continued to evolve in unexpected ways. Rachel spent the first few months after I moved out trying everything she could think of to win me back. She wrote long letters explaining how she'd realized the mistake she made and how she'd cut contact with Linda and stopped listening to her sister's advice. She suggested marriage counseling, promised to do whatever it took to rebuild trust, and even offered to sign a postnup if I was worried about her motives regarding our assets. For a while, I almost considered giving her another chance because her remorse seemed genuine and I missed what we'd had together. But every time I thought about reconciling, I remembered those months when I was genuinely terrified our marriage was ending while she was essentially acting out a script designed to manipulate me. About 4 months ago, I found out through mutual friends that Rachel had been telling people a very different version of our story. According to her narrative, we divorced because I was emotionally unavailable and couldn't handle her trying to communicate about problems in our marriage. She's been portraying herself as the victim of a husband who abandoned her the moment she tried to work on their relationship. This revisionist history bothered me more than I expected because it showed that Rachel still doesn't understand why what she did was wrong. Instead of taking responsibility for the deception, she's reframed the entire situation to make herself look like the wrong party. Linda and her divorced friends have apparently been supporting this new narrative and telling people that I was clearly never committed to the marriage if I couldn't handle some relationship drama. They've painted me as someone who was looking for an excuse to leave and used Rachel's communication attempt as justification for ending things. But here's the interesting part. About 6 weeks ago, I ran into Mark at a coffee shop, and he was surprisingly honest about what had really happened. He admitted that Linda and her friend group had been jealous of Rachel's stable marriage and had subconsciously wanted to sabotage it. He said they'd all been going through divorces and bitter custody battles and couldn't stand watching Rachel be happy when their own marriages had failed. Mark apologized for his role in the whole mess and said he'd realized too late that their advice came from a place of bitterness rather than genuine concern for Rachel's happiness. He warned me that Rachel was still being influenced by the same toxic sister and friend group and hadn't really learned from the experience. This conversation confirmed that I'd made the right decision by walking away. Rachel's inability to take full responsibility for what happened and her willingness to let Linda rewrite history showed that she hadn't actually grown from the experience. I'm now dating someone new who I met through a cooking class, and the difference in communication styles is remarkable. When Emma has concerns about our relationship, she brings them up directly and we talk through them like adults. The idea of creating fake drama to test each other's commitment would be completely foreign to both of us. Looking back, I realize that Rachel's willingness to deceive me for months was probably indicative of deeper character issues that would have surfaced in other ways throughout our marriage. I'm grateful that I discovered her true nature before we had children together, because I can't imagine co-parenting with someone who thinks manipulation is an appropriate way to solve problems. The experience taught me the importance of surrounding yourself with people who encourage honest communication rather than psychological games. It also reinforced my belief that trust, once broken through deliberate deception, is nearly impossible to fully rebuild. I don't regret my decision to divorce Rachel, and I'm much happier now with someone who shares my values about honesty and direct communication in relationships. Final update: it's been over a year since my divorce from Rachel was finalized, and I wanted to share one last update because there was an unexpected resolution to this whole situation. Emma and I got engaged last month, and we're planning a small wedding for next fall. When news of our engagement spread through our mutual social circles, I heard through friends that Rachel was telling people she was happy for me but that it proved she'd been right about me needing motivation to be a better partner. I just needed the right woman to bring it out of me. This comment bothered me because it suggested she still didn't understand that the problem hadn't been my ability to be a good husband, but rather her approach to trying to motivate me through deception. But the real revelation came 3 weeks ago when Linda's friend Michelle reached out to me via email. She said she needed to apologize for her role in what happened and wanted to explain something that had been bothering her for months. According to Michelle, the fake divorce scare hadn't actually been Linda's idea at all. Rachel had come to her sister with the concept after reading about it in some marriage advice blog online. She'd specifically sought out Linda and her divorced friends who would support her plan rather than question whether it was a good idea. Michelle said that Rachel had approached the situation very strategically, first complaining to Linda about my supposed lack of romance, then gradually introducing the idea of creating some kind of crisis to motivate me toward being a better husband. She'd essentially manipulated her sister into thinking they were helping her solve a problem, when really she was just looking for accomplices in her deception. This information completely reframed my understanding of what had happened. Rachel hadn't been a victim of bad advice from bitter divorced women, she'd been the mastermind behind the entire scheme and had used her sister as a support system to carry it out. Michelle apologized for not speaking up sooner but said she'd been loyal to Linda until she realized that Rachel was still trying to manipulate the narrative even a year later. She said Rachel had been telling people that Linda had pressured her into the fake crisis, when in reality Rachel had been the one pressuring them to help her execute her plan. I thanked Michelle for her honesty and told her I appreciated her finally coming forward with the truth. Her revelation confirmed that I'd made absolutely the right decision by divorcing Rachel, because someone who would orchestrate such an elaborate deception and then spend a year lying about it was clearly not someone I could have trusted as a life partner. The experience taught me valuable lessons about manipulation, trust, and the importance of honest communication in relationships. I'm incredibly grateful that I discovered Rachel's true character before we had children together, and I'm excited to build a life with someone who shares my values about honesty and respect in marriage. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us end up being blessings in disguise. Rachel's fake divorce scare destroyed our marriage, but it also saved me from staying with someone who was willing to use psychological manipulation to get what she wanted. I consider that a very lucky escape.